Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talking Stuff. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. This is the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast brought to you by The Podcast. It's Tuesday night as Andrew and I are recording this. Last show we did was on Thursday night. We're trying to get consistent, but then there's just sometimes when a lot of stuff is happening. And I figure if we wait until Wednesday, then you never know what's going to happen between now and Wednesday morning, Andrew, in the world of Ohio State recruiting, especially this time of year. It has been a crazy month. And a lot of moving parts for Ohio State in the class of 2025 and even in the class of 2026. But figure tonight we will start with what seems to be two new in-state targets. Not really new, I guess, because we've talked about them both before, but two players that I think will be in Ohio State's recruiting class by this time next week. Wide receiver Bodepin Miller. We're going to call him BP from now on. That's sort of his nickname, so it's a little easier than trying to figure out how to pronounce it. It's Bodpen. That's the name. Bodpen Miller from Ontario High School, 6'3", 185 pounds, ran a 4.44 at Ohio State on Tuesday after running almost 23 miles an hour on Ohio State's 1080 running sprinting machine last Thursday. Like, the athleticism is crazy. They offered this morning, Tuesday morning, they were having a 7-on-7 at Ohio State, and BP was a part of what they were calling the house team. So basically players at Ohio State had visiting or that they wanted to just see them compete. They put them all on this one team against the high school teams that had come in to visit. And Bodpin's quarterback was Troy Hoon from California. And once Troy and he got into the mix, like, he started throwing the ball to BP quite a bit, and he made a remarkable backwards diving catch. And Brian Hartline pulled him off of the field and offered him a scholarship at that moment. And now we fully expect that he will end up in the Ohio State recruiting class. The questions are going to be all over the place about what that means for the wide receiver group that's already being recruited by Ohio State. And as of recording this, it's 8 p.m. on Tuesday night. We still don't know if Bodpin is going to make the official visit to Ohio State this weekend or if it's going to be Boston College. He told me at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on Tuesday morning that his plan was to follow through with the Boston College visit because he's already told them he was going to do that. And he wants to be a man of his word. We'll see. I know Ohio State would probably be okay with that. I don't think ultimately it will change the trajectory of his recruitment one way or the other from this point. I think even if he makes a visit to Boston College next weekend or this coming weekend, I still think he commits to Ohio State by this time next week. But I know that Ohio State would prefer he get to campus and time with Tavian St. Clair, spend some time with the rest of the recruits that are coming into town this weekend as they build toward a really important official visitor weekend, which we'll talk about later. Jake Cook, who we talked about ad nauseum in the last 2 months, decommitted from Louisville on Tuesday morning. There's been no official word about his status with Ohio State, but as I tried to say last week, it seemed to me to be a foregone conclusion when the Buckeyes brought him back to camp last Wednesday and they did the one-on-one time with Justin Fry and they had him working for an hour and 15 minutes at center. It seemed to me they were not doing that unless they were going to offer him. And what you and I talked about on this show was that it seemed like the decision between Jake Cook, Andrew Stargell, and Caden, Strayhorn from IMG Academy, it seemed like they were pretty content to take one of those three guys at center. And over the course of the last 2 weeks, it's felt like the priority has shifted to Jake Cook. I think that we can assume at this point he will end up in the Ohio State class. I would fully expect that he will be at Ohio State this weekend for an official visit if all things are happening as I think that they are. So pretty big news for him. Obviously, Rivals.com has him as the number 9 ranked guard in the country. It's a top 10 player at the position. That's what you want if you're Ohio State. People will not give Justin Fry credit for anything because he's an in-state player, and that's fine. When he ends up at the Ohio State class, because I just don't think he would have decommitted from Louisville without that plan in place. So we'll see exactly how that transpires. When you look at Bodpin Miller, Andrew, what is What do you think about it? Because I know that you're worried how it impacts other receivers.
No, I'm not really worried. I guess props to you, first of all, just for bringing up that name last week, because he was nowhere on my radar. I think first things first, they would not have offered him today if they were not planning on taking him immediately, because obviously he's a local kid. Trust Brian Hartline. Obviously, that goes without saying. We've talked about the Jackson, Smith and Jigba, guys like that blowing up after Brian Hartline kind of zeroed in on him. I'm just kind of interested to see what this kid looks like in the fall. I know I've seen some people say played a lot of quarterback last year. I don't know what
it's all he's played. Not a lot of. That's all he's played.
Yeah, I guess that's all he's played. But your understanding, is that going to change this fall? Or I admittedly don't know much about the Mansfield area high school football leagues. So
no, I don't know. I mean, I talked to both his father on Tuesday morning and his head coach. I did not ask if that was the plan. Obviously, the idea for him is to transition to wide receiver. He has been at 2 camps as a wide receiver, and that's been at Ohio State. So, and he got an offer from the Buckeyes. So, like, it's pretty good. He camped at Ohio State in the past as a quarterback, and there had been discussion like, hey, this is a really special athlete, but like, what do you do with this? And then you see him at wide receiver, and at that size, I actually, and talking to Bodpin over the last couple of days, like, he thinks that there's a chance he could get to 6'5", 6'6". And if that happens, he's 185 pounds right now. It might take a couple of years to get to like 240, 245, but he could be an unbelievable tight end at that size. Ball skills are really, really good. Learning how to run routes and that kind of stuff is going to take time, but that's why you lean into Brian Hartline and you say, we're just going to let you mold him. I don't know if the plan is to continue to play him at quarterback. Generally speaking, small school football around the country, you take your best athlete and you put him at quarterback and you let him do whatever you have to do. Jake Cook, for example, like, has played mostly tackle at Westerville North, but the intention in college is for him to be a center. And so in talking to Westerville North coaches last week, they said that this fall they're going to rotate him at all 5 offensive line spots and let him get some reps elsewhere. I don't know if Ontario high school football can afford to take away their best athlete from quarterback, because I don't know what type of offense they're in. I know that he's a special athlete. Like, there's no doubt about it. And for Ohio State, like, it's a big decision. Brian Hartline, the last in-state wide receiver at Ohio State signed was Jaden Ballard in the class of 2021. So we're heading in 4 straight cycles without one. There are key targets on the board at wide receiver. We'll talk about Phillip Bell a little bit when we get into the OV recap from last week, but obviously DeCorian Moore is still out there. Vernell Brown is still out there. Now, you can argue that maybe Ohio State's a long shot for both of those guys at this point. There are some people nationally who certainly think that. I do not subscribe to that theory on either player, but it does now open the door, I think, in some way for potentially a 5-man wide receiver class, which feels insane to say. But almost because you have to look at Bodpin Miller as a 3-year down the road guy. Like, he's not someone you're counting on playing at wide receiver next year. So, like, you take him now because he's in this class, but you're not counting on him for 2 or 3 years. And that's a position of Brian Hartline has not really had the luxury to be in the last couple of cycles.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think the bottom line is, as far as Vernell Brown, DeCorian Moore, those types of guys, taking this kid, I mean, Miller is not going to like change things as far as that goes. If DeCorian Moore wants to commit during the early signing period, there's any team in the country is going to hold a spot for him, obviously. And the same goes for Vernell Brown. The only question I had last week when you initially brought him up was, if he's playing quarterback so much, how do we know what his hands look like? And the answer to that is Brian Hartline has been watching him a couple different times over the last week now. So I think that should put to rest any concerns or questions about that.
Yeah, he is a very good athlete and a natural pass catcher. Like, I think it's going to take him some time to figure out like how to be in the right spot running routes. And there was one play specifically on Tuesday where Troy Hoon had him on a fade route to the sideline, and there was probably 4 or 5 yards left until the sideline, and the ball was right where it needed to be. And Bodpin like started to go down, like, and almost like diving because I don't think he recognized where the field was. And that's just stuff you learn as you play the position. But I mean, what you're getting with this sort of decision is an acknowledgement that he's far too athletic to let out of the state. Devin Jordan, Ohio State's assistant wide receiver coach, according to his dad, was really the guy pushing for this to happen at first. And then Brian Hartline had to be sold, and he was. So what you see now is some decisions that have to be made. When it comes to the offensive line, it's easier because there's only one commitment. And if Jake Cook's in, he's the center. And then you still have other moving parts to figure out at the other tackle and other at guard spots. But at wide receiver, because of Quincy Porter's commitment on Friday, you have two. And if we put Bodpin Miller in the class in ink, now you're talking three receivers. To your point, I don't think that he's the type of prospect that right now is going to send like a shiver down anyone's spine, or because he's decidedly different than what Vernell Brown or DeCorian Moore or Phillip Bell is. But there's definitely going to be some decisions that have to be made. So I think that's a good spot to move into the offensive or the recap of the official visitors from last weekend and Phillip Bell, because we saw on Monday, crystal balls, RPMs, future casts, whatever, start to be put in Ohio State's direction. It seems very clear that it's Ohio State or USC. Talking to people in the recruitment, like, I think that I can understand why those future casts, RPMs, crystal balls were put in the Ohio State direction. But a lot of things changed on Tuesday morning when Bodpin Miller got offered. So now, and Phillip Bell, like, there was no plan. There has been no plan to make a decision anytime before like the very end of August, Labor Day weekend area. So now you have like 2 months to figure this out for Brian Hartline. And, DeCorian Moore, I think most people expect that he'll have a decision made in the next couple of weeks after he takes the Oregon visit. Vernell Brown, same thing. So a lot of these moving parts will stop moving in the next 2 weeks, probably. But Phillip Bell has already, his plan is to make a decision at the end of August. So, like, if those moving parts don't play in his favor, that's why I think, like, sometimes the RPMs or crystal balls or whatever we're talking about, like, they are a snapshot of where things may stand in a player's mind at a certain time, but it has very little to do with the circumstances of the class that they're actually being predicted to be in.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And with Phillip Bell, I have not followed that one too terribly close because, you've got the Brian Hartline tier, which is always the Jeremiah Smiths, the DeCorian Moores, the Vernell Browns. And in this class, I've kind of viewed Bell in that next tier down, which is still a tremendous tier. So no, that's not a shot at the kid by any means. But do you get a feel from what you've seen or from what the staff has told you as far as like what kind of receiver he is? Like, do they have a player comp, or do they view him in a certain light, I guess? I
think the comp is like a Mecca Ibuka. That's kind of the way they view him, that type of play. I saw Phillip on Monday because he was actually stuck in Columbus because of some family issues. So he actually did not leave on Sunday like all the other official visitors. He wasn't allowed to like go to the school or go to camp or anything else, but actually ran into them. And he's a legit like 6'2". So I've seen, because I'm 6 foot tall, and I've seen him listed on some websites at 6 foot, and he's 2 inches taller than me. So either I've shrunk 2 inches in the last, 2 weeks, or he's 6'2". So I can understand where they have that comparison. Kind of a thicker kid. He's not like a DeCorian Moore, Vernell Brown, Desi Jones type, which is that's 5'11", 6 foot slot guy. Like, he's a legit 6'2". He's your traditional Ohio State wide receiver. He's the Carnell Tate build. He's the Mecca Ibuka build. So, I think in some ways it actually allows Brian Hartline now, if you have Desi Jones as your 6 foot slot, you have Quincy Porter as your 6'4" outside guy. If you have a player like Phillip Bell and he ends up as the fourth receiver with Bodpin Miller, then you have your traditional, standard X receiver. And then, you have the wild card, maybe in a DeCorian Moore or Vernell Brown, who can do everything. So I actually think from a like class building standpoint, Philip Bell makes a lot of sense. He's similar in a lot of ways to Dalen McCutcheon out of Lovejoy in Texas. So like, I don't want to dismiss him because he's also taken an official visit to Ohio State this month and is on the list. But I think that it actually sets up really nice from a style standpoint for Brian Hartline. And it's not whereas a month ago we thought there was like a chance you're going to have 4 receivers and they're all going to be 6 foot tall, and now it actually shapes quite literally into being something totally different. So I actually think that's a good thing for Ohio State. We'll see how Philip Bell responds when Miller commits, and we'll see if there's even a spot left if Vernell Brown or DeCorian Moore pick Ohio State, which again, the Buckeyes are still of the mindset like they are in those fights. I do not know exactly what's being said privately to other schools, obviously, but there has been no sense of concession for Ohio State in those recruitments, despite the fact that everyone feels pretty confident that Vernell will stay in Florida and that DeCorian will stay in Texas. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, lots of things happening with wide receiver recruiting. Just kind of recapping some of the other stuff from the last weekend's visitors. We talked about Isaiah West. We thought that was going to happen. You know, the second running back in the class now joins Bo Jackson. That was not a surprise by any means. Now they're just shooting for Jordan Davison. We'll talk more about him later. I think kind of the biggest questions I have coming out of the weekend are in the trenches, like some of those guys that were on campus last weekend that we haven't heard a lot about, whether it's defensive linemen like Marion Dye or Maxwell Roy, who I think a lot of people think is going to Michigan, but I don't know if the Ohio State visits changed anything. And then on the offensive line, Micah DeBose, and I guess to a lesser degree, Josh Petty. It seems like he's going to end up elsewhere, but I haven't heard a lot of buzz on those recruitments coming out of the weekend, I guess. I wasn't sure if you've heard much.
No, I mean, Tuesday, or when we did the show on Thursday, I said like there's a sense out of Ohio State that they felt they could really change things in the Micah DeBose recruitment, and that is what I've heard coming out of the weekend. Now he did not commit, okay, so I don't know where the hell the internet has decided to like go crazy and start posting speakers on Twitter and what, like, he did not commit primarily, and I think that this is an important part to realize. He's already been a player who's committed elsewhere once. He decommitted from Georgia. There was a lot of talk that he committed way too early, and I think that his mom especially wants him to make sure he doesn't make that mistake again. That said, he spent a ton of time with Carter Lowe. The Buckeyes feel very good about where they are trending in that recruitment. I hate saying the word trending in recruiting because I know that it changes like the wind. But Josh Petty, again, I do not think that will end up at Ohio State. Buckeyes offered him a long time ago, but it took him nearly 10 months to get on campus because they were looking at all the schools that his sister was visiting, and now she's going to Florida State. I'm sure the Buckeyes gave him something to think about because the Ohio State staff is excellent on official visits, but I just don't see that happening. Jackson Lloyd, who visited 2 weekends ago, committed to Alabama. We'll talk about that later. But if you're talking about this past weekend, the Marion Dye one is interesting. I think Ohio State can win that fight. I don't know exactly where he stacks up on the list of priorities for the Buckeyes because, again, we talked about London Merritt last week. Zahir Mathis, who is going to take his official visit in the fall. Isaiah Gibson, the USC commitment, who's from Georgia, is on Ohio State's campus as of Tuesday, decommitted from USC. Sure, that one's probably going to be Georgia, but it is a reminder that there are a lot of moving parts on the defensive line that we just don't talk about because these kids don't talk. So there's the Isaiah Gibson, Jarquez Carter, the Florida defensive tackle, who's also starting his official visit on Tuesday. I think that those players will end up impacting what happens with guys like Marion Dye, Damian Shanklin, and Maxwell Roy in a big way. But Maxwell Roy is coming off of an ACL injury. Like, there's not a push from Ohio State to bring him into the class at this point. Michigan is obviously doing that, and I think that they'll take him. And good for him if it works out, but it's not a spot where the Buckeyes are pushing. Jim Knowles is a big fan of his because he's at the same high school Jim Knowles went to. but there's not a push to make a commitment there for Ohio State because they have all these other guys on the board, and he's just coming off a torn ACL, and they don't know exactly where that's going to go for him. So I think the important visitors this weekend certainly was Isaiah West. Brandon Finney, the defensive back from Maryland, he announced on Tuesday evening that he's committing next week. I don't get the sense it'll be Ohio State, and I think if that's the case, it means a couple things. But one of them is I don't think Ohio State's trying to go all in there yet because they have a pretty important visit from Dorian Brew coming this weekend, who they would love to be the third cornerback in the class. So, yeah, I'm rambling a lot. We're 20 minutes in, and I feel like I've talked for 18 minutes. But what other visitors from this past weekend are still in your mind?
I mean, those are kind of the big ones. I was going to ask, Trajan Odom's the other defensive lineman that was on campus a couple weeks back, I believe, North Carolina kid. I think Oregon, Ohio State, USC for him. He was at Oregon this past weekend, and I think USC is coming up. Do you kind of feel it's either or with him and Roy, or are they kind of like still viewed in maybe a similar tier, or any thoughts on that?
They are very similar from a player perspective, I think. Both 6'4", 265. The difference is Maxwell Roy is coming off the ACL injury. And on the other side of that is Trajan Odom is being recruited by USC and Oregon. And we know how those schools are involved, which means that there's a heftier price tag than maybe Ohio State would want to pay for a player that they think may be interchangeable with some other dudes. So Ohio State is not shy on the NIL front. I think we're past that point, but they are also not stupid, and they are also not going to a player that they maybe feel is interchangeable with someone else is not going to be valued the way like DeCorian Moore, for example, who is completely head and shoulders different than anybody else they're recruiting, even though there's a similar size to other receivers. Like he's just different. So they view him differently. So that group, and I think that there's a similar conversation like with Nathaniel Uwasu Boateng. Like I think that there's a similar conversation about him at linebacker. They like him. They like him a lot. His official visit went really well, but I don't know with Riley Pettijohn still out there that they feel like they can go all in there. And there's other players in the state of Ohio, for example, like Paul Nelson, who just committed to Cincinnati a couple of weeks ago or a week ago. Like that, if we're talking about the next in-state name to really know and pay attention to, it's probably Paul Nelson, the linebacker from Cincinnati. I think he's at Cincinnati Princeton. Maybe he's at Coleraine. I'm not sure, but like if Riley Pettijohn does not end up in the Ohio State recruiting class, I think Ohio State would be comfortable moving to Paul Nelson as opposed to spending more on Uwasu Boateng, even though Notre Dame certainly feels like they'll pay that. So the hard part is there's a lot of times these visits are happening, and these kids and their families are coming in with a set number, or they think because Ohio State has been viewed or created nationally in the last 6 months to be this huge spender, that everyone thinks Ohio State is just going to go dumb when it comes to money, and they're just not.
Yeah, Paul Nelson is a Princeton kid. So just to confirm, if they do need to go down, I don't want to say down the board, but if they miss on Pettijohn and then Boateng goes to Notre Dame or whatever, you think Nelson could be the next one to get an offer as far as local guys, and not McClellan that's committed to Missouri? We've talked about him a few times too.
Yeah, I mean, he's more, Paul Nelson is more of the weak side, long levered guy. Dante's a little bit more of a strong side linebacker. I think that Nelson would be the guy, and that's just where I think things are trending. That's to say, if things don't happen with Riley Pettijohn, who I have already been saying in the last couple of weeks, like I think Ohio State is a much more real threat to land Riley Pettijohn than anybody in Texas is talking about. But that's a common thread because the guys who cover Texas apparently don't think Ohio State has any idea what the hell they're doing in the recruiting trail, because they don't think they're getting anybody. So I don't know why they think that, but that's not my job. I don't cover Texas. Other than that, Messiah Delhomme, the safety from Virginia, visited last weekend. I still feel pretty good that he's a likely choice to be the 4th safety in the class for Ohio State, but there's no pressure to commit early. Ohio State has a lot of options that they're exploring. He will commit at the end of August as well, like right before the start of his senior season. So like we're going to have 2 real pushes here in the next 2 months. One's going to be basically the week and a half to 2 weeks after the signing or after the dead period begins this following Monday through the July 4th weekend or July 4th date, where you'll see a lot of commitments happen. And then that last week of August, you'll see a lot of commitments happen. So those are the times when, like, this class, which is at 16 guys right now, I think you could see it push to like 24 or 25 by the end of August if everything goes right. So I like Delhomme a lot. I think he's, that's Ohio State, Virginia Tech, Virginia, Maryland. So like, if not to sound arrogant, but I think if Ohio State really wants him, they'll get him.
Yeah,
and they do want him. They do want him. So they're not pushing.
And we'll see if you end up being wrong on Trey McNutt. Supposedly he's going to visit this fall, but we'll see if that happens.
I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I don't like when people like tell me I'm stupid. I don't like when people tell me I'm a dumbass. Like I like Trey McNutt a lot as a human being, and I think that he's a really good defensive back, and I think he's going to be a really good player in college. I just don't think he, for whatever reason, wants to stay in Ohio, and that's okay. I mean, not everyone does. It's the way of the world. Speaking of staying in Ohio, is there anything else on the or last weekend, official visit weekend 3? Let's move to Monday this week. We had the quarterback derby, right? Ohio State hosts Jaden O'Neal from California, offers him. Brady Hart from Florida offers him. They were supposed to host Jonas Williams from Illinois. He did not make it. They were supposed to host there's so many Bradys. What's the other Brady right now?
Schmigel.
Whatever. He was supposed to come in, did not make it. The interesting thing, and then Diabell, 5-star on 247. I don't know if he's if he's 5-star anywhere else, but I know he is maybe in the composite rankings. Commits to Texas. I said last week I thought it was Ohio State or Texas. It's Texas. And this will sound like I'm wearing scarlet colored glasses, and I know it will, and I don't care if people think that I am. It's fine. My personal favorite quarterback in the 2026 class is Troy Hoon, the kid from California who is at Ohio State today. Troy Hoon was the other player that was really being rumored heavily to Texas, and there were a lot of crystal balls and stuff for him to Texas. I think it could work out in a really positive way for Ohio State that Diabell made his decision early, because Troy getting back to Columbus ASAP is pretty telling, I think. And Chip Kelly's been recruiting him for the last couple months. They like him a lot. 6'4", just turned 16 years old, like really live arm, big kid. He's going to be like a 6'4", 225, 230 pound quarterback by the time he graduates in a year from now, or a year and a half, however long. I don't do time. But I really think that of the quarterbacks now that we've seen in the class of 2026 over the last 3 weeks, I would have Hune, which is, I think how it's pronounced, Hune, not Hun or whatever. Hey, Hun. I don't like that. That sounds like, he's at a local diner ordering a chicken fried steak. Hey, Hun, can I get you chicken fried steak, Troy? I don't like that,
Wow. I was just going to say, we always talk about how
I'm in love with a quarterback and I don't even know his name.
I think it's Hoon from what I've seen, but those dominoes, they start to fall rather quickly. And Michigan got another immense win over Ohio State when Brady Hart committed there shortly after getting an offer. But I don't know. I'm kind of fascinated to see where this goes. I think it's a fool's errand to be concerned about quarterback recruiting ever with Ohio State. But admittedly, a lot of the names that were very much on my radar are now committed elsewhere. Brady Smigel is getting crystal balls to Florida State. So maybe your boy Hoon, maybe that'll be the one. I don't know what other schools are involved there. I just know Texas was mentioned regularly for him, like you said.
Yeah. I'm not in like, hey, Hun, if it's quarterback the Hun, then I'm into that, like then I'm cool with it. But I don't like it either way. Let's go with Hune. I talking to people today at Ohio State, I do believe that he was the guy they were waiting to see back on campus to really confirm their previous thoughts about. And I think he did that in a big way on Tuesday morning. So I'm not going to say he's like the favorite now for Ohio State, but I do think it opens up the door nicely for the Buckeyes to make a move there with him.
Why did those other two guys just no show? That doesn't seem like that happens very often, especially to a program like Ohio State when it's a freaking quarterback.
I mean, I didn't ask, but I mean, it's travel. It's hard to get to places in this time of year. I mean, Jonas Williams was supposed to be at the Under Armour camp in Canton and at the end of April and didn't make it to that either. Maybe he's just not that interested. Maybe they have not shown the requisite amount of love. I don't know, but I mean, it is what it is. Trey Taylor, a 2027 quarterback from Illinois, close to where Jonas Williams is from, made it to both of those things. And he was great on Monday, got offered by Ohio State. So I think you have a second 2027 quarterback to really look at. We talked about Brady Edmonds 2 weeks ago, and as I think Brady Edmonds is probably the one I would watch the closest. But there's at least a second, because Trey Taylor from Illinois is really good. Like, physically kind of looks gawky, almost looks like a baby giraffe that hasn't figured out how to like move yet. But like, if this baby giraffe had a howitzer for a right arm, then that's what I think Trey Taylor is, So I liked him a lot in Canton. I liked him a lot on Monday. And I like the fact that he's a local kid when it comes to a quarterback, as opposed to Edmonds, who's from California, even though he has Ohio ties and his family's all Buckeye fans and all that stuff. But I like it. Now, should we even talk about the Brady Hart thing?
I mean, I don't really think there's that much to say about it, honestly.
Number one, I want to be very clear. There's a lot of times players from around the country get an offer to a place simply because they showed up and camped. That does not mean that player was a take yet for Ohio State. It was we like where you are. We think you've got potential. We want to see you in the fall. He was very skinny. And I'm going to defend him here because I thought he was pretty good on Monday, but there were a number of times when you could tell he's thrown the ball a lot the last few weeks. His shoulder was bothering him. He was not particularly accurate on Monday, did not look to have the strongest arm on Monday. But I know Ohio State likes him as a player, and they thought that, there's something to build on there. I'm not going to say that Ohio State offering forced Michigan to take him on Monday, because I think they probably would have anyway. But I think the way that the quarterback dominoes fell on Monday works very much in Ohio State's favor. I know the comparisons for Brady out there, like to JJ McCarthy, I did not see that at all. Watching him in person, I like the way he throws the ball. I'd like to see him healthy, because I didn't think he was 100% on Monday throwing it. And maybe that's going to inform a little bit of my opinion, but it also doesn't matter. He's committed to Michigan now, committed to Michigan like 3 hours after leaving Ohio State's campus. So clearly there was not a chance of that really materializing anyway, if he wanted to commit early. Like, there was crystal ball action for him to Clemson last week after he camped there and was offered by Clemson. So it's clear that he was a player wanting to commit somewhere relatively soon. And the message from Ohio State was, we like where you're at. Can't wait to see you in the fall. Let's see how you improve. And so I'm not saying the Buckeyes told him, we're not going to take you, or he tried to commit or anything crazy like that, because I don't know. What I do know is that the messaging was certainly not, we love you, we have to have you right now. And that maybe opened the door for Michigan, who has done a good job with him. So,
yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I had not researched him much at all. I saw the Clemson crystal balls last week. Then I saw the sudden crystal ball changes to Michigan, and shortly thereafter, I see a tweet that he's committed to Michigan. So
yeah,
good for him.
And good for him. Great spot. I mean, obviously, that's now 2 quarterbacks in a row from Florida for Michigan, with Carter Smith in the class of 2025, and now Brady Hart. They are a heck of a program, and they like those quarterbacks that are. I didn't see the mobility that would make me think he was JJ McCarthy-ish, but also it was a quarterback camp at Ohio State where he was not being forced to do a lot of sprint outs or anything like that. So whatever. He's a good player, though. I've seen his tape. Remember when Javon Boggs was committed to Ohio State, the wide receiver at Cocoa, a lot of people were watching Javon's film and going, who's the quarterback? Like, right. That's Brady Hart. He's a good quarterback, obviously. So it will set up another narrative that people will like to just talk about, the Ohio State, Michigan narrative, but it has really nothing to do with Ohio State. That said, final point, Troy Hune, I think, is the guy now taking shape as the number one option for Ohio State in that class at quarterback. The number one option for Ohio State at offensive tackle in the class of 2025 is David Sanders. He is heading to town this weekend for his official visit. This will be visit number 3 since the end of March. It's his final official visit. I think there was some discussion about him visiting Bama, like maybe tomorrow and Thursday before coming to Columbus. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think it matters. I still think it's an Ohio State and Tennessee battle with Georgia on the periphery as probably the third team. And with Jackson Lloyd committing to Alabama, with Henry Fanuku committing to Missouri a few weeks ago, with Javon McFadden not wanting to shut things down and wanting to take some more time, with Andrew Stargell wanting to commit now in July and Ohio State seemingly moving on from him, what felt like a really positive month of June for Justin Fry is now kind of on the brink of disaster, especially if they do not land David Sanders. And you hate to add more pressure to a visit that was already like the most important visit of the week, maybe of the month for Ohio State. But here we are.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the most important official visit of the entire cycle for Ohio State, and easily the most important visitor that Justin Fry has ever had on campus during his short stint thus far in Columbus. I don't know what the turnaround time is like. I can't remember if he has like an actual date set to commit. I don't think he does.
Does not.
But I mean, if they, swing for the fences this weekend and then come Monday or Tuesday, it's still kind of a lukewarm feeling. And then, maybe the Tennessee buzz comes back next week or something. I mean, there's going to be fans freaking out about that. And that's probably going to be a slight overreaction, but still very concerning because, I mean, you got Carter Lowe. There's a couple other guys. I like Jake Cook a lot, but this is like the guy for 2025.
Well, especially because you passed on Nolan Davenport at tackle. Like he's now committed to Wisconsin. You made that decision based on the thinking that, hey, you feel really good about where you are with David Sanders. You're moving the dial with Carter Lowe, with Jackson Lloyd. You feel like you have a potential swing guy in Fanuku or a swing guy in Javon McFadden. And now those are, who knows where those are going. And so you have put yourself, even plan B guys like Joshua Blackston out of Maryland committed to Rutgers this month without, hasn't visited, like, and that's an Ohio State decision, to be clear. Like they weren't asking him to take an official visit this month, but like it does put the spotlight on Justin Fry in a way that has to be uncomfortable because every other coach on the staff right now seems to be absolutely killing it on the recruiting trail. And Justin's approach has been be patient, be focused on a handful of guys at a time, and don't send out 30 offers at once. And in a recruiting timeline right now where everyone wants to commit early, like you can't be late. And that's how it feels like they've been on some of these other guys. And that Josh Petty, for example, like even though they were trying to get him up, like you have to find other ways, and I don't know what they are. Justin Fry, and this is what I want to be clear, is an incredibly personable, well-liked, hardworking, great conversationalist. Like the guy is not Greg Studwara on the recruiting trail. Okay, so we have to be very clear about that. But recruiting that position may be the hardest position in the sport to recruit. There's so few of those guys. They're very rarely from the Midwest, and you have to find a way to separate yourself. And I don't know that they have. And I talked about it on our Rooster show on Monday. Some of that, I think, is a matter that until someone like David Sanders picks Ohio State, it might be hard for other guys to do the same because they don't trust their eyes. I mean, Ohio State has the third most offensive linemen playing in the NFL right now of all the teams in college football. I think only Oklahoma and Michigan have more. So like you have the proof there. Like you have Paris Johnson, you have DeJuan Jones in the last couple of years, two very distinctly different career paths to get to being starting tackles in the NFL as rookies. So you have ways to put it all together. You have NIL, you have Columbus, this is a 45-minute flight from Charlotte to Columbus. This is not something where you're stacked up against it, or Jackson Lloyd, who had been recruited by Kalen DeBoer and Alabama's staff for the last 2 years. Like this is not that type of situation. David Sanders has been a priority for Ohio State for a long time. You're competing ostensibly against Tennessee. This is not a head-to-head with Georgia or Alabama, or like this is a recruitment where your involvement has all but eliminated Clemson and others. Like you got to win this one. Like you have to win this one. And if you don't win this one, there's no replacing him in the class. And winning the national team ranking championship does not mean squat in the big picture. But if Ohio State's going to do it, you have to have David Sanders. You have to have DeCorian Moore. So it is very difficult to understate the importance of David Sanders.
Yeah. I mean, if we're sitting here Monday or Tuesday and there's just not a lot of buzz, that's going to be an ominous feeling throughout the fan base. And it
shouldn't be. Let's be clear. David Sanders has made 4 other official visits. There has been no like immediate buzz coming out of any of them. That is not the way he operates. It's not the way his family operates. Like there is not going to, I don't want to say never, because when you say that, you get proven wrong sometimes. It would be shocking to me if on Sunday afternoon, David Sanders and his family are like, Ohio State is everything we've ever dreamt of. I can't imagine anywhere else. Like it's going to be a close to the vest, very reserved response because that's who they are. And that's how they've handled everything from the start. So like, just as a preemptive, like, don't freak out, like I think is important. Like, don't freak out because we're not going to do a talking stuff before that ends because Friday is my anniversary. And then we're going to Columbus for the Zach Bryan concert. And then Sunday we'll be traveling home and have some graduation parties. So like, we're not going to be doing one of these shows until probably next Tuesday. So don't freak out.
Yeah, I remember last time he was on campus, Columbus paparazzi spotted him and his family out flanked by Justin Fry. And I believe he's the only offensive lineman visiting this weekend. I think Blackston or whatever was on that list, but he's no longer on there. So I would venture to guess
Carter Lowe will be in town.
Or
Carter
committed guys. But I imagine that Justin Fry will be very close to David Sanders' side the entire weekend, and that's how it should be. So
I fully expect that Monica Daniels, Paris Johnson's mom, will be in town helping. I don't like to say these things because someone will post it on the internet or whatever. There's at least a chance that Paris Johnson makes his way into town this weekend to be around. Those two really hit it off when David Sanders visited for the Ohio State spring game in 2023. So like if they can have a little help there, that's beneficial. David Sanders looks up to Paris Johnson in a major, major way. So like that's what you need to get some help with. So David Sanders' visit is important, but there's other important official visits as well. Jordan Davison coming to town, coming off of the Oregon trip. There's buzz about Oregon that's been building for the last 3 weeks. There is a bizarre like swell of Michigan enthusiasm that they're going to win this fight somehow. I do not believe that's the case, but we'll see. Dorian Brew coming in on his decision. This is a kid who obviously was verbally committed silently to Ohio State 6 months ago. His entire recruitment has flipped upside down. Some of it, I've seen it rumored that it happened because Perry Aliano left. I've heard it rumored that it was because the Buckeyes had, the commitment from Blake Woodby and Devin Sanchez, and Naeem Offord was shortly after that. I mean, I saw somewhere on Tuesday that Ohio State had commitments from these other guys. That's not true. Like Naeem Offord committed 2 weeks after Dorian Brew would have been committed. So, facts matter, I guess. And Dorian Brew had been recruited closer than any player in that group by Ohio State for the previous year. So whatever. it's a big visit. But I think that like low key, most important visit for this weekend is Malik Autry, the defensive tackle committed to Auburn, who I think you're going to see Ohio State like really push to flip him from Auburn this weekend, because I think if you can do that, then you can feel a little bit more optimism about Zion Grady, one of his close friends and a defensive end from Alabama. And I think if you can do that, then you can start to feel like even a little bit more confidence about maintaining the Naeem Offord recruitment for the next 5 months, like because you have 3 of the top 5 players in Alabama committed. If you can do that, like it's a tall order, it's a heavy ask, but they're going to make a real push for Malik Autry this weekend.
Yeah, no, you said it. Jordan Davison, Dorian Brew, those are all very, very important visitors, top of the board targets. But I was going to say Malik Autry was kind of the one I was watching as the biggest. I mean, literally, figuratively, all that stuff. 6'6", 320-pound defensive tackle. They're not in on a bunch of defensive tackles. We talked about them a little bit earlier. Guys of that size do not grow on trees. They typically grow in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. I know he's visited USC. I know he's committed to Auburn. I have no idea what the chances or the likelihood is. I know he had a good visit before. So that's the one I've got circled as kind of the biggest one to watch. And Zion Grady as well, but I'm just from Missouri on that. I don't know anything about that kid.
Yeah. I think what you're looking for with Autry is at that size, that 6'5", 315-pound, 320 defensive tackle. If you could pair him, and we kind of glossed over Jarquez Carter from Florida visiting over making his official visit Tuesday, Wednesday. Like that gives you a nice combination. Carter's like the 6'2.5", 285, 290-pound defensive tackle, the smaller, quicker guy. And then you have Autry, and then you swing for the fences with Jakeem Stewart when he reclassifies. So like Autry is the one. Autry is the one that's like top of the board. Like I don't know often what Larry Johnson is thinking, because he is notoriously difficult to read. But from everything I've gleaned in the last month and a half since Autry and Zion Grady visited the first time, there is no doubt in my mind that other than Jakeem Stewart, Malik Autry is priority number 1 at defensive tackle. So everything else flows from that.
Yeah, it's just hard to accept that Ohio State is like an actual real contender for these guys from the state of Alabama, even in a post-Nick Saban world. But then again, I mean, Naeem Offord's committed, taking visits, but I think people should still feel relatively confident about that. But yeah, those are the 2 that I'm kind of watching the most closely this weekend. And then the Brew and the Davison one, we've talked about them plenty over the last few weeks, and getting them up here is big.
Yeah, we'll see Nate Roberts back in town. We'll see Tavian for his official, Tavian St. Clair taking his official, Naeem Offord taking his official, Devin Sanchez taking his official. Eli Lee will be in town to hang out. Carter Lowe will be in town to hang out. Fahim Delane is coming back to hang out. Like this is an all hands on deck weekend at Ohio State. And I think the best part about it is that the players in the class know it, and they're not going to put themselves in a position where they could be there and they're not. So it's really important for Ohio State. The actual list of this weekend is still a little bit uncertain, because again, I think we could potentially see Jake Cook there. We could potentially see Bodpin Miller there. We will see Brody Lennon there, the tight end from Cleveland who got offered by Ohio State last Thursday. He took his official visit to Kentucky over this past weekend. He's another guy that I would think you can put in the class pretty confidently, that probably by the end of June would be committed. And so like this is the weekend they've been waiting for. So it really, like, I hate that you could come out of this weekend feeling great about Malik Autry and Zion Grady and everything else, and then if you don't get a quick turnaround from Dorian Brew or Jordan Davison or David Sanders, then all of a sudden you feel like it's a failure. To be very clear, as I said last Thursday, I thought if Jordan Davison makes this trip to Ohio State that he will pick the Buckeyes. I still think that way. I think Ohio State will land Dorian Brew. I do not understand why people in Texas specifically are continuing to dismiss Ohio State as a real option there. It does not make sense to me. But we can talk about anything else you want to talk about as we wrap up this episode of Talking Stuff in the 4-minute offense, which is
yeah. Yeah, no, I was going to start with Dorian Brew though, just because I've read some scuttlebutt on the Texas sites, and you're right, it is all coming from the Texas side, to where they are under the impression that Ohio State is fourth for Dorian Brew behind Texas, USC, Oregon. That's coming from the same. I think this was from On3, and I believe it's Steve Wiltfong who has been saying for the last few weeks USC or Ohio State, which feels more realistic to me. So I don't know. I've just perplexed as to where that notion is coming from, I guess, quite frankly.
I don't know. And I think that it is an important reminder, like in this business, the one that consists of and is dependent on sources, everyone that I talk to generally is coming from an Ohio State perspective. So they obviously almost always feel better about Ohio State. Whoever the people in Texas are talking to, they obviously feel better about Texas. I think it's inconceivable that Dorian Brew, who was committed to Ohio State in January and had told the coaches he was coming and it has graphics made and all that stuff, I think it's inconceivable, with nothing else really changing in his recruitment, that they would have just become an afterthought to him and his family. I just don't buy that at all. That's just not the case. It just doesn't happen. You don't go from, I know this is where I want to spend the next 4 years, to, I don't even like them at all. It's, no, you can't sit with us type of thing. Like, I don't get that. But again, I've said it earlier with Riley Pettijohn, like we saw on Monday, the same Texas site, I believe, or maybe it was 247, I don't know, saying, because a lot of the Texas sites coming into the weekend were talking like, oh, they're going to lock up Riley Pettijohn, it's going to be done. And then they started writing, well, all of a sudden, this is actually going to come down to the wire between Texas and Texas A&M. And it's like, I don't think so. I mean, I firmly believe Ohio State is one of the top two schools in that fight. So now we'll see if A&M can make a push, but I think it's Ohio State or Texas for Riley Pettijohn. But they just seem to dismiss Ohio State as a contender. We've seen this. Here's what I don't get, and maybe you read a lot of other teams' media stuff, and it seems to me that there are experts or insiders for like every other team in the country that seems very confident that they know what Ohio State is doing. Like I saw someone say, well, Ohio State took a commitment from Isaiah West. They're not taking 3 running backs. Like, they are taking 3 running backs. Doesn't matter if it's Jordan Davison or not. They're taking 3 running backs. So I don't know where this concept or where this idea that these other people have a better read on what Ohio State is doing. And if they don't, then they just flat out dismiss them altogether. And it's like, this team has finished in the top 3 or top 4 of the recruiting rankings every year for the last 15 years, except for 2019 when Ryan Day took over and they only had 17 commits. So like, how is this the program people keep dismissing? I just don't get it.
Yeah, like 48 hours before the Quincy Porter commitment, some of the Michigan sites were saying that their intel coming out of Columbus was that he wasn't a take for Ohio State or something, which is just absurd.
Stupid. Like, where does it come from? I knew on Thursday morning that he had committed to Ohio State, and I'm still reading throughout the day like, oh, he doesn't even like Ohio State. They have nothing to offer him. Like, what are we talking about? Like, he told the coaches on Thursday that he was canceling his visits to Michigan and Oklahoma, which is why I told people on this show on Thursday night, I didn't think he was going to take those visits. And yet Friday morning, it's still, oh, sure he is. So, I mean, maybe he didn't tell their staff. I don't know. But it just seems like there's this common thread that everyone thinks that they, like Ohio State all of a sudden has no idea what they're doing on the recruiting trail. Like, I just don't, it's weird. I do not get it.
Yeah, it's baffling. You mentioned Jordan Davison a bit ago, so not much on him, but Carlos Loughlin, who is just a menace on social media, and I love it. Not so subtle tweet the other day, referencing the 3 guys that he wants in the class. Obviously, he's got 2 now. So as of now, you still feel like that trifecta is going to come to fruition?
Again, if he makes the visit to Ohio State, I think he's picking Ohio State. I don't know if he was really turned off by the idea of being in a 3-man class, he would have canceled his trip because he knew that these 2 guys were going to be committed. So, and while I know he has a good relationship with Carlos Loughlin, he's got a good relationship with Ryan Day, and I'm sure he would want to take the trips and follow through with what he said he would do. Like there comes a point when you're traveling back and forth around the country, you don't owe that to anybody. You get tired of this, and like if you don't want to take the trip, don't take it. And he wants to take the trip. To me, that is still an indicator that Ohio State is where he wants to be, because like, little side note, him and Philip Bell are like best friends, by the way. That's like those two are very close. And so like, I don't know if those two will end up in the class together at Ohio State, but I do think that it is something to also note as that moves forward, as we see the crystal balls for Philip Bell. Jordan Davison, this is the other thing, man. I don't mean to go all soapboxy on people, but there are so many times in this new 24-hour, 7-day-a-week recruiting news cycle where people put in a crystal ball or put in a prediction, and then every week they're like, well, I'm very close to changing my prediction but then they never do. Like, so, and there seems to be nothing that matters more to people than being right in their predictions. And so they never change it until the very end. So if you're getting good intel that you really think Oregon is running away with this and Ohio State is out because it's down to Michigan and Oregon, then how come nobody's changing their predictions? And that I think ultimately still matters. You can have a million different reasons to think that you know what's going on in this space, and that's me too. Like I'm obviously getting 85-90% of what I'm hearing is from the Ohio State side of things. But if the people that you're talking to are not living in reality, or they're just making stuff up to make them feel better, then you're getting fed garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, it makes sense. Who knows? Last thing real quick. Justin Hill was in Columbus on Tuesday with, what was it, his 7-on-7 or his team or something?
Yeah, Winton Woods was there, part of the 7-on-7 tournament at Ohio State.
That's right. He was in Bama last weekend. Big official. What are your vibes coming out of that, or what's your concern level at coming out of that, or what are your thoughts?
You know a lot of the old rules of recruiting, right? So like after the Ohio State official visit weekend, there was a ton of buzz about Ohio State, right? And then he went to USC, and then there was a ton of buzz, and it's either USC or Ohio State. And then he went to Alabama, and it's either Alabama or Ohio State. And now he's got a trip to Oregon, and I'm sure we'll hear it's Oregon or Ohio State. So there's a common thread, and I think it's going to be Ohio State. I got the sense just from talking to Justin a little bit on Tuesday that he seems like slightly fatigued with this travel and back and forth and back. I mean, you're going from LA to Alabama to Ohio you're going from Ohio to LA to Ohio to Alabama to Ohio to Oregon. Like that is a lot on these kids, and that is the risk. And, when you talk about, is it better to have the first official visit or the last official visit? Like, I think Ohio State would be in a different position with him if they had the last official visit, because it's close to home and it's not traveling across the country again. But like, especially when you're traveling east to west and you're losing sleep and you're jet lagged, like you don't get, these trips are not relaxing. They're not like fun trips where you just sit around and spend your whole time talking ball. Like it's just go, 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 go. And I think he's getting a little tired of it. July 3rd is the decision date. That's not changing. I do, and I'll say this, not to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I do think it's Ohio State or Alabama. I think it will be Ohio State. But
cool.
Damian Shanklin was also at Ohio State on Tuesday with his teammates, Indianapolis.
West Central? I can't remember.
Warren Central.
That sounds right.
So he was also there. I spent some time talking to Damian. Like, he is a really hard kid to read, man. I cannot really Warren Central in Indianapolis. I have a very tough time getting a true vibe on what he's thinking. And I don't think I'm alone in that. It seems like the people in Columbus are also similarly vexed by him. But there's 2 months until he makes a decision. And if things go well this weekend with Malik Autry and Zion Grady, there may not be a spot. So that's, and I don't know. Sometimes I think that like kids want decisions to be made for them, Also, when someone from out of state says Ohio State's the dream school, don't listen. because that is
Yeah.
garbage. Stream
Yeah.
schools don't matter. We're at an hour again. Andrew, thank you for taking your time on Tuesday night. And for those of you watching and listening, we really do appreciate it. As I said, we're probably going to not get back to do another one of these until next Tuesday. If anything important happens between now and then, and stuff that is important will happen between now and then, I'm sure. We'll do our best to cover it and get some stuff here on YouTube and the podcast channels. Biggest things to know on Tuesday: the offer to Botman Miller, the Jake Cook news, and Ohio State preparing for a massive official visit weekend. He's Andrew Ellis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff on the podcast. Thanks for watching. We will see you next week.